The Jerry Doyle Show.
Today in San Francisco, Attorney General Eric Holder made the case to get rid of mandatory minimum sentencing for low-level drug offenders. Our guest, Senator Rand Paul, the Republican Kentucky senator, made the very same case in bipartisan legislation that he introduced in March called the Justice Safety Valve Act. He's joining us on the program to discuss it. Senator Paul, welcome back.
Hey, Jerry. Glad to be with you.
I was looking at some of the stats on this, and tell me if I'm wrong because you know a lot more about this than I do. Is it true that almost half of all the incarcerations in the United States are for drug offenses?
Yes, and the dollars associated with keeping and housing all these people in prison are staggering. But also just think about it. For a nonviolent crime, for a young person, makes it almost impossible for them to get a job after they have this arrest record. So there's all kinds of reasons why we ought to reconsider how we're treating kids who make these mistakes.
You addressed this issue at Howard University, the historically black university. I remember you going there and giving the speech there. When you introduced this idea to the audience, what kind of a reception did you get?
You know, I think there's definitely from the black community a feeling that justice has not always been served, that it has been unfairly sort of meted out, particularly for young black men in our country. ACLU came out with statistics about a month ago saying that blacks are arrested and incarcerated at 5 to 6 times the rate of whites. And so there really is a lingering sense that, blacks just aren't getting justice with the current drug laws. Michelle Alexander, who's a professor and an author from Ohio University, writes about basically the drug laws being the new Jim Crow, that basically inadvertently, no one's doing it on purpose, but the way they're structured, it seems to come down harder on young black males than anybody else.
Now, this legislation that you're talking about would exclude anyone with a gang affiliation or ties to a criminal organization. These would be considered, in your case, Senator, one-offs, just individuals that did the wrong thing and got popped and then got caught up in the min-man sentencing?
Yeah, the legislation actually hasn't been completely worked out. I have one bill that gives the judges discretion, so it doesn't allow someone just to say, oh, hey, he's innocent. What it does is the judge gets to look at the facts of the case, and that's kind of really why you want a judge, is to look at the facts of the case, find out if it's a first offense, a second offense, a third offense. Was there violence involved? Was there threat of violence involved? And then to make a decision. Right now, the court tells the judge he has to give a mandatory minimum sentence. Sometimes this is 10 or 20 years in prison, and for nonviolent crimes. We would like to give the judges back the discretion to make the decision in these cases.
Washington Post today, the headline, Holder's move on mandatory minimums, a boon to Rand Paul. They conclude the article by saying, while much work remains to be done, Rand Paul stands to gain plenty. Gain with who? I guess, are the Republicans okay with this? Because I know sometimes libertarians, in addressing the drug laws, upset certain arch right-wing conservative Republicans. Is this something that's going to fly in the Republican Party, and how do you stand to gain from this? What is the Washington Post trying to tell us here?
Well, I think it's a nice in-between position. There are some libertarians who are for no drug laws. That's not what I'm advocating. What I'm advocating is if we have drug laws and we keep the drug laws, that we try to make the penalty proportionate to the crime, and that we get rid of this arbitrary, overzealous incarceration. And in doing that, I think it's a middle position that actually most of the Republican Party will support. I always tell people it's sort of an interesting conversation. There was a interview a few years ago, and it had Pat Robertson, Jerry Falwell, and I think Cal Thomas. And they were asking them, if a young man or woman in your church were caught in possession of drugs, what would you prefer, incarceration or counseling? And every one of these religious conservative leaders said counseling. And I think any parent would say this. Is there just about everybody in our country knows somebody or somebody's friend or relative who's had trouble with drugs, and most of us would want that they get help, that they quit using the drugs, but none of us are too excited about throwing them away and locking up the key and saying, this is the end of your life.
I don't remember the title of it, but it was something on 60 Minutes about a guy down in Texas, Republican, cowboy boot wearing, law of the land kind of a guy, judge type, and he had set up this diversion program in their court system. and their graduation rates for these drug offenders was staggeringly high, and he approached it more from a people issue rather than, kind of you're just another number or set of numbers in the system. And I was watching that and I was going, that's a very interesting way of looking at it and dealing with it. And when I saw the people that were graduating from these programs, Senator, they felt like they had gotten their lives back as opposed to wasting their lives away sitting in a box for 10 years.
I think society is evolving. People's opinions are changing on this. Some states have gone as far as to talk about and have legalization of marijuana. But I think even people who aren't ready to go that far are ready to get to the point where we shouldn't have long sentences and have people in prison for long periods of time for nonviolent crimes. It's extraordinarily expensive, but it's also extraordinarily damaging to that young person's, future. And really, a lot of our kids make mistakes. If you think your kids are not making mistakes, you're not being honest. Or if you think you never made mistakes growing up, people just aren't being honest with themselves. A lot of people just got lucky. The president says he got lucky. He didn't get caught.
Right.
I'm hoping he will show some sympathy for some of these kids whose lives are ruined. They can't vote. They can't own a gun. They can't participate in a lot of jobs once they've been arrested for drug crimes that a lot of famous people in our society have admitted that they did when they were kids.
Speaking of that, by the way, Senator Rand Paul is with us, the Republican senator from Kentucky. The website, randpaul2016.com. You can follow him on Twitter at Senator Rand Paul. Some states are looking at the allowance of voting and hiring, and they're saying that in particular with regard to hiring, that the look-back laws, the black box laws, have to be eliminated, that once you've done the crime and you've done the time, that an employer shouldn't be allowed to look at what your criminal record is, which would preclude you from perhaps being hired. We have 47% of the people, 50% of the people that are in prison for low-level drug offenses. That would be something also that would be an employment issue, would it not be?
Yeah, and I'm not sure how we fix that, but one way of fixing it is maybe to have the state expunge your record after you've behaved for a certain time. You serve your time, and then you behave for a few years, and then if it's a nonviolent crime or something that's not a habitual crime, that maybe we could go ahead and expunge your records. And I think that's something I could be in favor of, whether that's done at the state or at the federal level, is kind of open. We've actually been looking at that a little bit and seeing if there's a way we could get people back. Because one thing that I've learned recently, and I didn't realize this, if you don't pay your child support, not because you don't want to, but because you don't have any money, you become a felon.
Yep.
You lose your right to vote for not paying child support. And, I think a lot of us realize that sometimes people don't pay their child support because they're just down on their luck and they don't have a job. And then they're a felon and they can't see their kids. They can't go into the schools with their kids. They can't participate in their kids' life at school because they're a felon.
Yeah.
So some of that's really unfair.
I know you're busy, Senator. Last question for you. In the Washington Post article about Eric Holder's move, a boon to you, they say, while today's Republican Party primary voters generally don't like their elected officials working with the Obama administration, blah, 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 I would have to think that would be a plus, that you actually found a way to work with the administration, to work with the Attorney General, teaming up with Senator Mike Lee, the Republican from Utah, Dick Durbin, the Democrat senator from Illinois. I would think that the Republican primary voters would like to see somebody get something done, and I would have to think that would be a plus, not a negative, in the Republican primaries.
I think there's some issues like this of fairness and justice that go across party lines, and this is actually how a Republican could win a general election again, is by supporting some of these justice and Bill of Rights issues that really don't seem to be one party or another, and in fact sometimes both parties aren't doing a very good job. Then I think it's the way we grow the Republican Party and actually could do better. We could do better in general elections.
It is. Those issues of fairness and inclusion, those are the things where people would come to say, hey, Senator Rand Paul, he actually cares about, and then people see themselves there as opposed to, somebody trying to say this is being done for you. People are smart enough to figure it out for themselves, and I think that this is an issue that if you can work with the administration on this, will take a lot of stress off a lot of people's lives. And as you say, outside of the fact of saving billions of dollars for the taxpayer, I think it also saves a lot of lives and gives people a lot of hope going forward. So we wish you the best on this. Senator Rand Paul, thanks for joining us on the program.
Thanks, Jerry.
Stick with us. We'll be right back.
The Jerry Doyle Show.